Hello, everyone, and welcome to our very first pre-recorded mini lecture for BBMM506 Strategic Management. My name is David Valdez, and I'm your lecturer for the next couple of 6 weeks, actually, of lectures. So this isn't the very first video, actually. We do have an introductory video that's available also on Moodle, which delves into the learning outcomes for this unit. So I urge you guys to go back into Moodle and view that video if you haven't done so yet. But today we'll go straight into our lecture, which is basically chapter 1 and chapter 2, where we discuss basically what strategy is all about, who is in charge of strategy, and also an introduction to what we call the business model. Before we go on, I want to caution everyone that this is just a mini lecture. It's not meant to take over all the material that you need for this unit. I'm giving you just a very brief introduction to what the topics are for chapter 1 and chapter 2. And if you really want to get the full experience and full learning, I would urge you guys to actually attend the live sessions, Zoom sessions, where we have actual discussions that go on. And it's really a better way to learn rather than to watch a 20, 30-minute video, which oftentimes can be, quite frankly, quite boring if there is no discussion. But the intention of the mini lecture is so that after you view the live session, you can actually go back into Moodle and view this as a review, as a form of review. Or perhaps maybe you are not available during the actual live session, and you could use this to basically take the place, although it's not as good an activity to take the place of an actual live session. So let's go on. So again, as I said, 2 chapters we'll try to cover today. And it's really an introduction and discussion on basically what is strategy all about and what is a business model versus what a revenue model is. So here I've got a lovely picture of the crowded path towards Mount Everest. You see a lot of people trying to accomplish this goal, which is, of course, to climb the highest mountain in the world. Those of you who are from Nepal will, of course, be familiar with scenes like these. But this is just a metaphor to basically what strategy is all about and how that differs from, say, a goal and the actions towards to reach that goal. So a goal in the context of Mount Everest, of course, if you're a climber, what you want to do is climb this highest mountain, which is roughly 29,000 feet above sea level. So the goals are the end objective. This is what we want to accomplish. And it's the destination where we want to reach. And strategies it's basically the means to an end, or how a business will achieve its goals. So in other words, in the context of Mount Everest, it's basically how are you going to reach this peak? What pathway are you going to take? And in actuality, there are actually 2 options to climb Mount Everest. One is through Nepal, the south side, but you can also climb it from the north side, which is a little bit different. What I hear is there's less snow, but it's not necessarily easier, I must say. And less people actually use the north side to go up to Mount Everest. But these options are an example of what strategies are all about. These are 2 options that you can use to gain your objective of climbing Mount Everest. So action steps are the details of how we're going to be achieving this goal. So things like, what equipment do we need? When do we start climbing? What happens if something goes wrong? What happens if the weather doesn't turn out to be very good? What are we going to do about that? So that's what we mean by a contingency. So in case something goes wrong, we have a backup plan. So all of these are what we call action steps. Again, these are more detailed discussions on the general options, which are the strategies. So what are strategies? Again, they are the means to an end, and they're often very relevant for the entire organization as a whole. And organizations can be very small. It could be your small business, but it could be a conglomerate like, say, West Farmers, which owns Kohl's, Bunnings, Kmart. All of these businesses of West Farmers are part of an entire organization called the conglomerate, which is West Farmers. So strategy can be, in that sense, relevant for West Farmers, the conglomerate, but it's also relevant for individual businesses like Kmart. So Kmart, again, is a retailer, like a department store retailer. And these strategies can be specific only for Kmart or for Kohl's, the supermarket. And these strategies are often changing. They can change depending on what's happening on the outside, the environment. They could change incrementally, which means they're changing slowly, but they can also change dramatically, which means that they're changing, like an abrupt shift in the direction of the company. So one example of this is that Kohl's has always been owned by West Farmers, but recently they've announced that their West Farmers is actually going to try to sell the business of Kohl's, hopefully to somebody who's willing to buy that business. And that, I would say, is a dramatic shift, because you're actually selling your business, a very strong part of your business. A little bit of a stiff neck here. Sorry. Gotta never know what's going to happen when you're doing a recording, right? So anyway, to some extent, all managers are strategy makers. So in other words, we're not really saying that strategy is for CEOs or the top leaders of the company. Strategy is also formulated down the ranks to middle management, for example. Even supervisors may have a strategic thinking in place there. They may be thinking about how to do their jobs, how best to influence their subordinates, for example, might be part of their strategies. So again, it can include strategies for individual products and services. So for example, if I'm Apple, Apple has an individual product like the iPhone, and therefore they could be thinking about strategies about the iPhone and how it's going to compete in that smartphone business. But it can also go into strategies for Apple itself about what businesses Apple should go into. Right now, Apple is not just into computers, they're now into entertainment. They're producing content for TV, for example, which is very different from what they used to do in the past. So this is, again, an example of a strategy for an individual product, but it's also strategy for the entire corporation, Apple Corporation, and what businesses it's going to be entering. But it can be very specific. Strategy can also be talking about how do we do our marketing, for example, for iPhone. It's not just iPhone itself, but basically the specific function of marketing and the specific function, for example, selling the iPhone or producing the iPhone. These are strategies for operations, as an example. Remembering that strategy and strategic management has no right or wrong answers. Okay, so it's really about, it's like a process, and we may have very similar analysis based on the inputs that we're gathering, but it doesn't mean that we're going to have to always have the same decisions, the same options, the same choices. So these can change. And really what's more important is you go through the correct process, and you're making decisions based on these inputs that you have gathered. So again, there is no right or wrong answer. A CEO, depending on his style of management, might have a very different decision to make, a different strategy to take. The same thing as when you're climbing Mount Everest. After gathering all the information, many people decide they want to climb it via the Nepal side, south side, but then there are some who might decide, I want to climb from the Chinese or the Tibetan side, which is the north side. Again, there's no right or wrong answer. Each option will have advantages and disadvantages. But really, it just depends on the way you analyze these advantages and whether you can work with these advantages better or not. So we've discussed what strategy is, but really, what do you mean by strategic management? So strategy might be, again, the means to an end, but strategic management is more about the process of how we come about these strategic choices. But it's really more than that. It actually involves, number one, setting the goal. So strategic management includes identifying what goal you want to achieve. Again, that it's part of the process. It's the first step, really, clarifying what you desire from the business. Strategy creation is mapping out a route for achieving goals. So this is where the actual strategy comes in. And as I said, it doesn't really stop there. So after we identify the path, now we talk about implementation. How do we put these strategies into practice? What are the little details that we need to outline in order for us to actually implement the strategy and achieve the goal? Fourthly, adaptation. Knowing that even if we've decided on a route, there could be changes. Something can happen along the way, which requires us to change direction and to move away from an obstacle in order for us to achieve the goal. So strategy, it does not mean that once you set it, it will remain to be the same. It really depends on the situation. Your competitor could be acting in a certain way, which you didn't expect. Therefore, you need to sort of adapt to those changes. So it's just like you're climbing up Mount Everest, but there is a landslide that has happened that has blocked the way. And therefore, your original route may have to change based on that landslide. You may have to change tactics and figure out a way around this obstacle that has just formed. And finally, we go into evaluation, which is really looking at our performance and looking at our progress on whether we're actually achieving this goal or not. So in the symbolism or the metaphor of Mount Everest, it's really how do we know that we've done well? As we go along, we have to be constantly monitoring our progress and to decide whether are we in fact on the way to achieving that goal. There's also a little saying that it's useless for you to be climbing a mountain and it's useless for you to achieve the goal if you don't make it back home. So a lot of people actually die after they've achieved the goal of climbing Mount Everest. Going back down is actually equally as important. You need to be able to walk back and actually save yourself. And a lot of people actually die in that stage of the climb. But evaluation really is more than just saying that we've achieved the goal. How did we achieve that goal? So that in the future, when we set ourselves another goal, hopefully we can learn from the past and use this feedback for us to improve future performance and future goal setting. So strategic thinking, again, very similar to just coming up with strategy. It's really like a process, and you need to have the awareness, the knowledge, and the understanding of certain things. The first one is how your current strategies have evolved through the years. If you're a company, you should be aware of, what your strategies have been, and how has it evolved, how has it changed through the years. And this is really important. You need to know the historical context of what has happened in the past. That way you don't repeat the mistakes that you've made in the past. So think about yourselves for a moment, and then think about the things you've been through as a student, and think about the things you've learned in making your decisions. Has there been an activity or an event that has happened with you that has basically caused you to learn from that and to perhaps change your strategies towards the future? Um, Companies should know, should be aware and have knowledge and understanding of their current competencies. What that means is we should know what our strengths are. What are we good at? And what are our capabilities? And that way we could use that to choose the correct strategy. So a strategy is useless if you can't implement it. So if you don't have the strength, let's say, for example, again, using Mount Everest as our example, is if you're not a hiker, if you're not physically fit, then maybe the goal of reaching Mount Everest is not an appropriate goal for you. But again, if this is your thing, you're adventure loving and you're physically fit, and you're driven by that, then maybe, yes, that's your competence. Your competency is being physically fit and climbing and hiking. Then, of course, that would be a good strategy or good goal to be able to aim for. Otherwise, if you're not physically fit, maybe you can hire a helicopter to simply bring you up to the top, right? So that's just one way to have a thought about how your competencies can help you meet these objectives. Knowing what your resources are. Again, you might be thinking, okay, I'll take a helicopter up to Mount Everest, but that can be quite expensive. And do you have the money to pay for that helicopter flight? Also knowing that it's not exactly easy to find a pilot who will agree to bring you up there. Existing competitors, what they're doing and planning. So awareness, knowledge, and understanding of what your competitors are doing is part of strategic thinking. Now, there are many stories about companies who have chosen a strategy, but as they're trying to implement that strategy, they realize that their competitor has beaten them to it. They've actually reached that, they've actually, say, launched a new product before the company has, their competitor has beaten them to that. And that could mean that the company might need to change their plans and then change basically their goals or their strategies. Another important thing to consider would be future competitors. Now, your competitors, you have an existing set of competitors. You might not know it, but another company might be planning to go into this business of yours. And basically, they may actually prove to be the more competent competitors, the stronger competitors versus your existing set of competition. An example of this would be Garmin, and Garmin is a company that makes satellite navigation equipment. So if you remember many years ago, in fact, even until now, there are many cars with satellite navigation devices. So you put that in your car. You can buy it from, say, Harvey Norman, and input the maps in there, and basically tell by pressing on the screen where you want to go, and it will actually guide you through the streets on how to arrive at your destination. But then that was the past, and now I'm not sure if they were able to realize that their future competitor would be Samsung, Apple, and all of these smart devices that have come out So that basically, like this one that I have, of course, our smartphones, they all now have the capability of providing satellite navigation. And they were not competitors at the time, in the 90s perhaps, but now they are in fact the stronger competitors. Why would a person have to buy a satellite navigation device if that is already available in their smartphones? So opportunities and threats. So you need to be able to forecast what these opportunities are, and also determine what can happen. Let's say COVID-19 is a perfect example for many businesses now. COVID-19 represents a threat for survival of the business, because again, we're all shut down and businesses can't operate with the same freedom. So strategic thinking, again, also includes the ability to share information and learn from our partners or suppliers, distributors, and our customers. So it's an acknowledgement that if you want to be strategic, you have to realize that all the knowledge out there, you can't possibly have all of that by yourself. A lot of that you'll have to gain from other people. You need to partner with your suppliers and figure out ways to do things. And even your customers can actually teach you something about how to improve your operations. And if you've got that openness to learn from your environment, from your suppliers and your customers, then that's again part of strategic thinking. So this slide just illustrates how strategies are actually a link to the future. So that strategic thinking actually, when you're thinking about your strategy, what you're doing is you're looking at your existing competencies, your strengths, what resources you have. You're looking at your learning experience in the past, what has guided you through the years, and figuring out a strategy for the future. So strategies link our current competencies, our past, our learning, with our future, which is the vision. So I have a pause at this point. At various points in our mini lectures here and into the future, I would have questions like this, which makes you try to reflect on what you've just learned in the last couple of minutes, and also, how that applies in your life. So this is an example. What strategic decisions have you made in your life? How's that affected you? So have a look. As students, have you had to make a very strategic decision which changed your life? I know one example of that is actually choosing to come to Australia from your home country. And that's a very strategic decision, because it means something, it will shape your life from here on now, your experiences here in Australia. Are there other strategic decisions perhaps that you have made in your life? Maybe it's a lifelong partner, a wife, a husband, whatever it is. Think about that, and why do you consider it to be a strategic decision? So we'll pause for now before we start again. Okay, let's go on with our lecture. And as the slide shows you here, strategy actually, for an organization anyway, strategy has 3 levels generally. We talk about the corporate level, the highest level. The mid-level would be the competitive strategy. In some books, they call this the business strategy. And then lastly, the functional strategy. And as we explained earlier, we said that strategy actually is not just done by the CEO or the top leader of a corporation, but it's usually done all the way down to the business managers and down to the functional managers. And I'll explain that by saying, in corporate strategy, the question that we are asking here usually is, what business should we be in? Knowing that in many corporations, they actually they could be in several industries or several types of businesses. Again, an example that I gave earlier would be West Farmers. West Farmers is a conglomerate. That means it has many, many businesses. Usually they're in retail, but they're also in even mining. They even have a mining concern. So among the businesses they own would be Kohl's, Bunnings, Kmart, for example, and Target. So all of these separate businesses, basically what West Farmers does is on the corporate level, they decide what businesses should we be in. And then down to the competitive level or the competitive strategy level, that would be for the business managers, let's say for within Kohl's or within Bunnings, to decide how do we compete against our competitors within that business. And then if we move lower down, we're talking about functions like marketing, human resource, finance. The managers within those functions are now deciding their strategies on how to support the business strategy. So for example, for marketing, how do we market a particular product so that it can win against competition? So that's a functional strategy, but focus more on marketing. On the human resource side of it, they're looking at things like how do we attract talent? How do we attract the right kind of employees so that we can support then the business strategy or the competitive strategy? So as you can see, it has several levels. There's in fact a video that I urge you to watch. It's in Moodle. Again, it is the difference between corporate strategy and competitive strategy. We can get this to move. This is the EVR congruence model. And this figure you will see constantly in the next couple of weeks. We'll go back to it quite often. The EVR model is really composed of the environment, that's the E, the V, which is the values of the company or the leader, and then R, which is the resources of the company. And this model helps us understand that strategy is actually a product of all these three areas. And we get input from all three areas in order for us to come up with strategy or the right strategies. So it's really very familiar in the sense that it's actually, it's very similar to a SWOT analysis. And if you've ever heard the SWOT, it's what it stands for is the strengths and the weaknesses, the opportunities and the threats. Now, when we talk about strengths and weaknesses, we're actually looking at the internal characteristics of the company. In other words, what the company is, without considering what's outside, we consider what are the strengths and weaknesses of our organization. And then if we turn our attention to the outside, we're looking at the environment, which is the external side, and we're looking at what opportunities can we look at or can we actually exploit, and what are the threats. So threats are, again, things that are negative that are coming from the outside. For example, of course, would be competition. So if I am Samsung and I make smartphones, I'm seeing Apple with its iPhone as a threat. And the actions that Apple does actually can threaten the success of our business, the Samsung business. But of course, there are opportunities as well. For example, the fact that I think if you've probably heard Samsung now has come up with a phone that's like a flip phone. And if you open it this way, the screen has now double the size of that. And that's coming from an opportunity, knowing that people are actually looking for big screens, but they don't want a big tablet that they cannot put inside their pocket. So think of that, and they've come up with this product to exploit an opportunity. And that's born from a strength of theirs, the strength that they've been able to invent a screen that actually folds. So again, that's a combination of looking at a strength and then capitalizing on an opportunity. So in the EVR sense, we're looking at the environment which is the source of our opportunities and threats. And then we're looking at our resources, which are what we're good at. So that includes, again, for Samsung, the ability to come up with a screen that you can fold. Values really means that's the things that we believe in as a company. So if we value innovation, for example, that can form part of a strength for a company. And also the influence of a leader. Right? If the leader shares his values and influences his subordinates, that basically will form part of its internal characteristics or its strengths and its weaknesses. So again, it's just an interplay between the external environment and the internal environment. The internal environment in the EVR model is actually composed of the values of the company or the culture of the company and its resources, again, which forms the strengths and the weaknesses. Okay, you might find this slide a little complicated, and all this is actually showing us is that oftentimes when we come up with strategy, we formulate it based on, of course, the EVR, which is looking at our environment, looking at our values and our resources, and we may come up with an intended strategy. But then that strategy oftentimes changes as the years go by. And again, this will depend a lot on what's happening. If we find that our intended strategies are not working, we may in fact make some changes to it as shown by this slide here or by this box here. And that strategy can eventually be very different from our intended strategy. And that's what we call the actual strategy pursued, which is a product of the emergent strategy. In other words, how that intended strategy has been shaped by the leader or by the people around within the company to make that change. A great example of this is a person named Dave McConnell. This is many, many years ago. And Dave McConnell was a writer. And he, of course, wrote books. And his intended strategy, of course, or you can say that his business model was to sell books, because that he was an author. And wasn't that successful. He found out that as the years went by, he really wasn't selling that many books. So he came up with a strategy, and that was, maybe if I give away a bottle of perfume to go with my book, then I can sell more books. So that was the intended strategy. And again, it's born from that model of selling books. But then it became quite successful, but not in the way that he wanted it to be successful, because he realized that people were buying his books not because of the book, but because of the perfume. In fact, many people were throwing away the book and using the perfume. And then that's the consequence. And therefore, what happened was from that germ of an idea, he decided to sell more perfume than books. Eventually, he discarded the books. And as you can see here in the top, discarded strategy, which is the strategy of selling books, was thrown out the door, and he focused on selling perfume. And that is the start of his company, which eventually became the cosmetic giant named Avon. And you might be familiar with Avon. And again, that's the emergent or the actual strategy pursued was quite different from the intended strategy of Dave McConnell. Okay, let's talk about chapter 2, the business model and the revenue model. They're actually, the revenue model is part of the business model. And the business model is basically a description of our business, but it's very focused. What you have to do when you state your business model is, firstly, you need to determine who am I selling to, and that is the target customer. And then what am I selling to them? What product or service am I selling to them? But then more importantly, why will they buy my product? So why will they choose my product versus my competitor? And that's really the essence of what we call the value proposition. Probably a really important part of this unit, because the business model really determines our strategy. And if you think about it, if you don't have a good business model, then the business doesn't have a chance of surviving. And again, the essence of that is knowing what we are selling, what product, whether that's a tangible product, something we can touch, like an iPhone or a Galaxy smartphone, or whether that's an intangible product like a service. Service could be things like you're providing security, or you're providing cleaning services to companies and things like those, or consultancies, or like a school. A school is actually selling a service, right? So that's what we mean by a product. It can be tangible or intangible. But then we need to know, who are we selling to, and why are they going to be using our product? An example, let's take CIC Higher Education, our school, that is as an example of this. And the business model, of course, is we are selling education, the service of education to international students. And this is actually a deliberate target of the school to focus its efforts on selling education to international students. We don't take in domestic students because we feel that our strengths in terms of marketing and in terms of teaching really cater to this target market. So what's the value proposition? Why would students like you choose CIC? For many of you, you will choose CIC because it's one of the cheapest colleges. But there are other reasons why you might choose it. It's possible that you had a friend who said that they enjoyed their learning within the school, and they basically said that this school is very appropriate for international students. We make a huge effort to try to basically include international students. We know the challenges that are faced by international students, and therefore it's a more appropriate school for international students. And that is really our value proposition to our target customers. When we look at the operating model and the revenue model, these are actually quite similar aspects. But this, again, would be more activity-based, and there are components of the overall business model. So in other words, it's more specific when we talk about the revenue model. So the revenue model focuses on activities, or in other words, what businesses do to conserve resources, to manage its resources efficiently, and to prioritize resources that create and build value for customers. So as you can see from this definition, it's really more detailed, and it really talks about particular activities that we do in order to support the business model. Part of it is the fact that we are using full-time lecturers. We hardly depend on sessional lecturers, and that is actually a part of our strategy in order for us to conserve our resources and actually to deliver our education in a more effective manner to students like yourselves. So other aspects of the revenue model might be, how do we conserve resources? For example, how do we cut costs without affecting the quality of our service? Okay, so here's an image or a figure which can really illustrate what the components are of a business model. And the very topmost here is really what we would be considering our business model. So we said, who do we sell our products to? Our target market, in other words. Why are they going to be buying our product, which is the value proposition? How do we bring our product to the market, whether it's online or face-to-face, for example, for CIC? Where do we locate our business? Are we locating ourselves in inner Melbourne, or are we in a suburb? We've decided that our best route to market would be to situate ourselves within the city. And then, of course, how do we build loyalty, product loyalty, and customer relationships? So all of that is part of our business model. And if we move down here to the mid-level, we're looking at what resources do we need, what activities and operations should we be doing, and what partnerships should we be having in order to support the business model. And that would be part of what we call the revenue model. So the revenue model also includes the revenue streams that we have. So in other words, how do we make our money? We can have several offerings. For example, a bachelor degree in accounting, bachelor degree in marketing, bachelor degree in management. So these are revenue streams. Of course, we look at what activities comprise our costs and how do we reduce those costs. And then finally, the difference between our revenue and our cost would be our profits. So obviously, the decisions we make on our revenue and the decisions we make with our costs will result in basically a high or a low profit. Okay, here's a really good example of a business model and how a company can create a business model that is quite different and can create a lot of value for its customers. So let's look at the traditional circus industry. Again, this industry has been around for probably hundreds of years, and it's an entertainment industry. And usually this is something that attracts kids, children. And children love to see animals. They love to see acrobats, and you can see this picture. You'll see acrobats flying in the air, very typical circus. And then, of course, circus has to have animals. You've got an elephant here, trained elephant that can sit and stand, a lion that's been tamed by a lion tamer or a tiger, and clowns, of course. And these are the most common things that you might see in a traditional circus. And it's what we call a red ocean type of industry. It's been around, very mature. There's so many circuses out there, lots of circuses to choose from. And a company's come along and decided that we cannot compete in this kind of if you have the same business model. What happens is if you have so many businesses that have the same business model, then that's a recipe for basically increased competition, and that's why they call it red ocean competition. So Cirque du Soleil has decided its business model should be quite different, and in fact this is an example of what we call a blue ocean strategy. And the business model that is shown here is that it is, first of all, it's not selling to kids. It's catering to discerning adults. In other words, adults who love the artistic part of live entertainment. So it's very artistic. It's live, meaning they hold the show. They don't record it. You have to watch it in a venue. They use thematic storytelling, and I'll explain that in a little while. It feels like a circus, but they don't use animals. They can portray animals, but they don't use trained animals. So Cirque du Soleil, and you can see here that they have, again, different shows and different themes. So for example, let me see, like Michael Jackson 1 is a Cirque du Soleil show which features the music of Michael Jackson. Totem over here, I think this is the one that, this is more like native or indigenous culture. Kuza, I'm not not sure what Kusa is, but again, each little show, not little, but basically 2 hour show usually, has a theme of some sort or a story. So it's like a circus, but it's actually telling a story. And it is blending the artistic side of it using acrobats. But then they don't have animals. And again, they stick to a theme. And you can see the costumes are fantastic. They're very, very creative and very beautiful. So they've been highly successful, although quite recently they had to be shut down again because of COVID. But then we expect that they will, of course, recover because they have such a unique business model. So here it shows us how different they are from the traditional circus. In terms of price, because they're not really competing against these traditional circuses, they can actually price themselves quite high. And they don't really have any star performers. While for the circuses, they have to hire famous celebrities, perhaps, or not just celebrities, but performers, so that they can attract more people. So really important part of Cirque du Soleil's business model is the fact that they don't have any animal shows. And you might say that could be a disadvantage. But given their the target market, which are adults, the adults actually don't see much value in seeing animals because they can always view that in the zoo. And so probably one of the biggest success features of having no animals is the fact that you don't have to pay to feed the animals, to take care of the animals, which you might know is really the most expensive part of having a circus, is caring for the animals. If you've ever owned a dog, you know it's actually more expensive to take care of a dog than oftentimes to take care of a human being. So it's a crucial part of their strategy or their business model, the fact that they don't have to spend to take care of these animals. And it's one of those features that really does not add value anyway to their business model. So other aspects of why they're different include the fact that they use stories and themes. They have multiple productions and not just one type of show. And the fact that they're using artistic methods and using art and dance and music to set them apart from their traditional competitors. By the way, that's really the essence of strategy, is knowing what to focus on, what not to do, and what to do. So they've decided not to offer animals. Again, part of their really successful strategy. Okay, now this slide simply shows us that for any strategy, we can use this model to decide, whether it's going to be something appropriate or something effective for our business. And what this shows on the y-axis or on the vertical axis is whether a strategy makes a lot of sense given our firm. Are these part of our strengths and weaknesses? For example, for Cirque du Soleil, their strengths belong under the fact that they're using art, they're using dancers, they're using artistic type of a circus offering. That's their strength, and therefore it makes sense for them to go into business within that show business type of a industry. While we're looking at our financial logic, which is the horizontal axis, we take a look at whether a business can actually make money using this strategy. So those are the two main criteria that we should look at to determine whether we've made the right strategic choice. And if we are able to focus on the upper right hand quadrant here, as shown in this drawing or this figure, we know that yes, this strategy makes a lot of sense for us. This is part of our strengths and weaknesses, but it's also capitalizing on an opportunity and demand for the services that we're providing. And that way we can make money from it. So, however, if we might be having a strategy that actually makes a lot of sense in terms of our strengths and weaknesses, but there's no demand for this service or product, and that would be wouldn't make financial sense. Therefore, that is an option to avoid the lower left quadrant.